Hello, and thank you for joining us for another Wellness Wednesday. As you know, we have spent this last month of February discussing Black history, and we have engaged in some very important conversations, some difficult conversations, and we are very excited to be joined by 5 new faces today to continue our conversation about Black history and capping off this month with discussions about Black excellence, achievement, and where do we go from here. As you know, our goals at the Classical Academies are to create students who are successful thinkers, achievers, and communicators, and we are really looking forward to the final installment in our Black History Month conversations.
Thank you so much, Jessica. So as we continue this, we have, like we said, 5 new faces, some from a group Upstanders, and then of course, Dr. Willis. And we are so honored to have all of you with us today as we continue this conversation. And so, Dr. Willis, would you give us a little bit about yourself?
Of course, sure, no problem. Hello to everyone. I am honored to be here. My name is Dr. Darlene V. Willis, and I use that V because I'm named after my grandmother, her middle name, and I carry it well and in my heart since she's no longer with us. But I'm so glad to be here with you all. I am the co-founder and executive director for Concerned Parents Alliance College Bound Programs, and the newly created group, the Willis Group, LLC, and glad to be the president and CEO of it. And I empower scholars and their families around the country how to take back your household for parents and family responsible adults and ensure your child has the choice of attending college. In addition, I work with clients on racial equity and inclusion. I want to make sure that our voice is being heard out there. And that's a little, you'll learn more about me as I keep going, but I'm a native Oakland, member of the Bay Area, born and raised in Oakland. And I just love doing what I do. I'm a retired educator. And as someone said earlier, well, you'll hear from the person, you work more, even retired. So I'm excited. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, thank you. And can someone from Upstanders just give us kind of a synopsis of what you do? What is Upstanders?
I can jump in.
Yep.
My name is Jewel Adriana Copeland, and I am a teacher in the community. I've been teaching for 16 years, and I teach social studies, and I am part of the equity team that my school is a part of that deals with a variety of issues. And at that point, I started working with the San Diego County Office of Ed and met Kirsten Grimm. And during COVID and with the numerous protests that were coming out, Kirsten started contacting members who had gone through equity training and people that she had met across the years, either by going to school with or just working out and being a person in her own community. And she brought us all together, white and Black, and started posing questions and conversations and really getting us to not only build our stamina for conversations about discrimination, but also to empower us to do our part. And PART is an acronym for publicly acknowledge, reflect, and take action. So we meet once a week in order to do our part, in order to educate each other, in order to push each other's boundaries, reflect, become better, and go out into the world and make our communities better as well.
Love it. Thank you.
Just to reiterate, we're so grateful to have all of you here. Thank you for taking the time out of your days to do this with us and share your insights with our students. So just to start off the conversation, I'd like to ask, what do you want students to know about African American achievements, and who are some significant or prominent Black people throughout history or even currently that our students may not be familiar with? Dr. Willis, maybe we could start with you.
You know what? There is so much to learn about Black history. I think when we start thinking about the great achievements that we've made, I know many times we tend to default to Dr. Martin Luther King, Dr. Maya Angelou, Rosa Parks, and they are wonderful. They are definitely wonderful heroes and sheroes, Black historical figures, and really fantastic. But I like focusing on sort of the little to unknown. Or if you utilize those three, then absolutely go deeper with them. So for example, with Dr. Martin Luther King, instead of focusing on the I have a dream speech, look at the letter from the Birmingham jails and what that means and how it applies to today. There are people like Fannie Lou Hamer, an unknown shero, because remember, not everybody makes the headlines. Not everybody makes the front page, right? So we want to focus on those that are very important. So Fannie Lou Hamer, who was the civil rights activist, voting rights advocate who said, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. From Hattiesburg, Mississippi, just outstanding. There's the Robert Smalls of the world and Bain Rustin, I'm trying to think, Bessie Coleman. You don't hear about these individuals who have made amazing contributions because they're sort of overshadowed. And the other thing I would also say is that taking this information, I applaud you all for celebrating Black History Month at Classical Academy, but I want to push you a little further to not just celebrate it in Black History Month, but to celebrate it throughout the year. And the way to do that is to incorporate it into your lesson plans, into your curriculums. So that's what I'm standing for. That's why I'd say looking at the past. When you look at the present, and tell me if we're there yet and if I'm jumping ahead, because I can slow it down so my colleagues can have some answers too.
I mean, yeah, does anyone else have any other people that they want to throw out before we move to the present?
Oh, absolutely. Ms. Love, you can go ahead. I'll come after you.
I'll defer. I'm overwhelmed by all these powerful women in the room. So if I step back a little bit, step on a toe, you can let me know, okay? But go ahead, Ms. Copeland.
One thing that I like to do in my classroom is to emphasize what Dr. Willis said so beautifully, which is that Black history is American history, right? And we really need to remember that, especially in a social studies curriculum, social studies is inherently social justice. And very often we study what we call political revolutions, which change who is in charge of government. But really, social revolutions are the things we remember because that changes society and it changes our lives. And it's bigger than, say, the Enlightenment, right? It's bigger than the scientific revolution. The civil rights movement is a social revolution that changed America and continues to change it because the roots and the flowering that comes from it, we can see every day around us. And we see it in the continued struggle. And I think that that is something that we should emphasize. The way that I like to do this is by empowering students and reminding you that the majority of the movements were not done by the wonderful people that we learn about in our history books. The civil rights movement initially was heavily pushed by young people. And it's important to empower young people and to remind them of that. So it is beautiful to learn about Rosa Parks, but let's not forget young Claudette Colvin, who sat down 9 months before Rosa Parks. She was 15 years old, and she was not the person that gets the credit for pushing the Montgomery bus boycott because young Claudette was pregnant. And she was not going to be seen as a suitable face for the civil rights movement. So when Rosa Parks decided to sit down, she was a secretary for the NAACP. She made that choice consciously. She knew she was going to get arrested, and she knew that she was going to push this forward because that was all part of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s civil disobedience and the beliefs of Gandhi that an unjust law is no law at all. And that in order to empower people, we have to remember that just because Jim Crow laws were legislation, that they were not moral laws. And we see this again during the Holocaust. Everything that was done to the Jewish people was lawful. but that was not moral law. So the civil rights movement is these young people, and I emphasize that again, because older Black Americans were not willing in the beginning really to go and start this movement, and through no fault of their own. They had seen people in their youth be lynched for things like walking on the sidewalk and not moving when a white person was in front of them. So of course they're not going to intentionally break laws and bring things down on them. But young people listening to these words were inspired. Claudette Colvin sat down 9 months before Rosa Parks, and she did it during Black History Month because she had just been studying about all these amazing figures. So it's important to inspire and be inspired. I love to talk about Thurgood Marshall. I tell kids that he's my boo, right? He's the first American on the Supreme Court. But before that, he was the attorney that argued Brown versus Board of Education, which allowed for the overturning of Plessy versus Ferguson, which allowed for the integration of schools and allowed for me to teach in a classroom with people of all races. But when Thurgood Marshall won that case at the Supreme Court, the onus fell on children to integrate the schools. So then we have to remember Ruby Bridges, who at 6 years old was the first to integrate elementary schools in New Orleans, Louisiana. That shouldn't have been on the shoulders of a baby, but it was. And they still tried to stop her. She had to pass a test that was above grade level, and she passed that funky little test. And then they had to admit her and still tried to stop her. And then the National Guard had to escort her. And she was by herself. Little Rock 9, those were children, right? So this fell on the shoulders of children to really push this movement forward. And it didn't really get traction until white young people joined as well. When we think about the integration of restaurants, right? And the movement away from the colored section and the white section, I always want to remind people that in itself is why this is American history. It wasn't just Black people that were separated. It was Mexican people, it was Asian people, it was every color that was not white. And again, this fell on the shoulders of young people, young college students and high school students who went and got trained in order to take the physical and social assault that they were going to take by breaking the law intentionally, so that when the newspaper showed up, when the television showed up, it wouldn't be a group of thugs interrupting individuals having a peaceful meal. It was the onus of this immoral law that was still a law. And at that point, that's when America had to look at themselves and they had to decide, which person am I when I watch this? Am I the young Black person that's willing to stand up and take all of this? Am I the older Black person that is not willing and that is scared, that is listening to them tell me that I'm in my place? Am I the white person that's there and uncomfortable but not saying anything? Or am I the white person that is spewing hate? America watched it, and that's when the movement started making traction. And again, that fell on the shoulders of young people. So if anything, I think the number one thing we need to take away is Black history is American history, and social studies is inherently social justice. And this social revolution was pushed forward by the feet of young people. And it will continue to be so.
And that's how it works. Just like that, right? That just like that. And when you said that, Jewel, it really should be Dr. Jewel, because I feel it in you. I feel the passion. Listen, this might be something just trying to remind you of something, but it reminded me of when you see that photo now that they have, which says Ruby Bridges walked so Rosa Parks could sit, so Kamala Harris could run. So now just learning that little information about Claudette Colvin, then it really should read Ruby Bridges walked so Claudette Colvin and Rosa Parks could sit, so Kamala Harris could run. And here we are, because Black history is American history. That's what it's about.
I so appreciate that redirect too of Black history being American history, because I think that's one of the things, I'll speak for Charles and Andrea and myself. We've known that this would be a launching pad to a greater conversation. We knew that February could be utilized as a tool to discussing issues of social justice and equality and race and discrimination and everything else in our American history that needs to be discussed, the discomfort of it, sitting in the discomfort and having these conversations. And so I just really appreciate that redirect, because the last thing I want is for our students, our community, our staff to think that these conversations end with the calendar month of February, because we know that it's just the beginning of larger conversations and larger understanding and growth in our cultural humility and understanding ourselves in relationship with the rest of the world. And so I appreciate both of you redirecting that and rephrasing that, because I think that it's really helpful for me, and I think it's super helpful for other people to hear as well.
Y'all are making this a tough act to follow, but I have some thoughts, and like a good student, while Dr. Willis and Ms. Copeland were speaking, I'm here taking little notes of things I want to bring up, okay? So I want to redirect for just a minute and add a little bit to the flow, because Ms. Copeland brought up one of my heroes, Thurgood Marshall, and we need to understand that Thurgood Marshall, when he was practicing law, based Brown v. Board of Education on 2 previous court cases here in California involving Mexican-American students. For those who don't know the history, it's Alvarez v. Lemon Grove and Mendez v. Westminster. We hardly ever hear about them, but they were the stepping stones for Thurgood Marshall to build his case, which was airtight and didn't fly through the Supreme Court, but it definitely led to the integration of schools in Little Rock at that time. We also talk about the young people, and excuse that phone in the background if you can hear it, about who are the prophets. The young people are the prophets because you are growing up with a clean slate. Too many old folks who've lived through it, they struggled in the early days, but now the responsibility is taking care of you young people, because y'all like to eat, y'all like to go places, y'all like to wear clothes and do things. The transition from young to old, or from old to young, needs to take place sooner. Okay, y'all need to get involved, and I'm going to bring 2 things up. 2 books that I had that I loved growing up. One was called Black Voices, and Dr. Willis, I know you had this one when you were growing up. This was a staple in the Black student unions and across the nation, because it was a chance for us to give voice to the struggle. And really, young people, this is not new. Know this, a lot of the struggle has already happened. A lot of folks did the work and handed you the check. Now it's your time to cash it and do something on top of it with the money, okay? In my research also, I found a book involving one of my ancestors who helped integrate a beach in Mississippi in the 1950s and 1960s, okay? Dr. Milas Love and his colleague, Dr. Gilbert Mason, who were the first practicing Black doctors at the White Hospital in Gulfport, Mississippi, okay? Which didn't happen because Black folks didn't have medical coverage and couldn't go to the White hospitals. But we'll deal with that issue in another meeting. But I say that because if you look at the pictures, it's, as Jewel and Dr. Willis was saying, it's not just doctors and lawyers and teachers and preachers. Average folk, mothers, grandmothers, daycare providers, your crazy auntie from up the block, they all got involved in this. Everybody didn't need to be in the front. Some folks, I'll walk with you, I'll walk behind you, I'll walk beside you. And everybody in numbers can really make a difference. And the last thing I'll bring up today from today's newspaper, if you didn't see it, a young lady is highlighted here. Her name is Ayanna Johnson, and they have started a Black student union at Torrey Pines High School, okay? Torrey Pines High School, where the number of Black teachers is 0. So they decided that they wanted to step up. This young lady, I read the article, I'm almost moved to tears just looking at her, because these are the young people we need to stay involved. Use your voices, have your keen eye for justice. Most of you have a real sense of what's right and what's wrong, what's just and what's unjust. And instead of sitting by idly wishing for a Dr. King or another Dr. Willis or another Jewel Copeland, we already had one of them, okay? They played their part. The challenge that I offer is, what part are you going to play at whatever level you decide to play it, and make a difference in improving the conditions that we're all living under here in this country we call the United States.
And may I just add to that? I think the difference is they don't have to reinvent the wheel.
Mhm.
because it's already been done. But it can be done even better,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
Because we didn't have the tools and resources that today's youth have.
Mhm.
So this is not something that's brand new, because we're not throwing out the history and saying, okay, young people, you go and create your own. We're saying, let's sit at the feet of those that have sacrificed and have given their lives and, made personal sacrifices. Learn from that. Do your research. When I hear schools or even others say, I can't find anything to do on Black History Month, and everybody comes up with the same 3 or 4 folk, I kind of go, all you all have to do is just Google. And it comes right up.
Mhm.
Go try to find somebody's encyclopedia, and my family may have been able to afford A through C, and maybe I had to call Michael and say, hey, do you guys have a D through L? And Miss Smith may have said, wait a minute, we got P through Q, and then everybody's all mixed up. But the resources, young people, are right here for us. I'm gonna say I'm young. That's right. I'm still gonna claim that. I'm not in that old category, Mr. Love. I'm proud. I'm a proud 57-year-old, and I can still hang with the best. But the thing is that it's so important that we bring a mixture of all of this heritage and legacy, so we can celebrate together throughout the year.
Yes, and to piggyback on that real quick, the miracle of technology, we don't have to surreptitiously print out flyers and slide them to each other about the meeting at the church 2 Sundays from now at 8 o'clock at night. Okay, y'all can bip 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 group bang, and everybody knows everything. Okay, instantaneously. So the idea of mobilizing people is powerful in numbers and in groups. And yes, there will be challenges, but as Dr. Willis said, a lot of the groundwork has been done already. Y'all don't need to go back. You can look back, but don't go back. See what was done, see what worked and what didn't work. Check the time now, and let's move forward. Okay. The group that many of us are involved in here, Upstanders, totally through social media and email. Some of the folks I've never met in person, Jewel. Angela, Alicia, right? But that doesn't matter, because in contacting and dialoguing with them, we're all of the same heart, mind, and spirit. So we're moving in the same direction.
Absolutely.
And can I just add too that it doesn't have to be an exclusive group, because that's turning back around what we don't like, what was being done with us. So it must be inclusive. And I think it was Dr. Calvin Mackey that I always borrow this from, that not everybody looks like you is your friend.
Right.
Not everybody that doesn't look like you is your foe. So in order for this to work, we must work together and have an exchange of dialogue, so that we can make sure that people aren't, now if you're being ill-willed, that's something different. That's a whole different workshop we need to have. But most people are not ill-willed. They want to help. We need to understand each other. And so I do talk about this in the book Revealed, but the thing is, and I use the word ignorant, and a lot of people get offended by that word. And I'm like, why are you offended? Ignorant means you just don't know.
Just don't know, right?
You just don't know. It's not a bad thing. Now, if you call me stupid, then we've got an issue, right? Because my action might be stupid, but if I'm ignorant, I just don't know. So I need to make sure that Ms. Smith knows what that means if I'm talking to her, or when you say, oh, Ms. Smith, I just touch your hair. That's a microaggression, right? But if we don't explain that, let me see, Jessica might be just saying, I just always kind of wanted to touch that kind of hair, right? Just because she just wanted to do it. Now it's up to Angela to be empowered and to speak her truth. Ms. Smith to say, excuse me, Ms. Novello, if I didn't know you better, I would think that would be a microaggression, and somebody else might think that. So let's talk that through. Let's talk through that. And that's what we have to do, has this exchange of dialogue. So this is where it goes beyond Black History Month.
Dr. Willis, powerful words. And I'm just going to toss this question out there. Are the struggles that Black folks had only the struggles of Black folks? It's our Latino brothers and sisters, our Asian brothers and sisters, our gay and lesbian brothers and sisters, our poor white brothers and sisters, okay? Oppression takes many colors and flavors in different places and different times. And we have to understand that many folks can gain an advantage by splitting us up instead of having us speak in one united voice. So Dr. Willis, inclusion definitely should be a key word for today. We're not about leaving anybody out. We're about letting people in. And you let them in with knowledge. You let them in with the teachings of real history and the struggles of all people, so that I'm not threatened by the Latino brother sitting in the seat next to me in my class because he may speak a different language. Okay, I'm not threatened by him. We want the same things. His parents want him to go to college and my parents want me to go to college. So we need to stand together on this. Good points, very good points.
Yeah, I mean, wow.
And I didn't introduce myself. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and do that now. Okay, Michael Love, retired educator after 27 years in the Grossmont district at Mount Miguel High School. I also worked with young people for 12 years before that in various other ventures. I'm also the founder of Love Power Educational Consultants, which is a group of Black male educators who look to support, number one, young Black male educators to get into the business and stay in the business. And number two, looking to support those who are mid-career, who may be burning out and thinking about getting out and doing something else, so that we can nurture you, carry you through, because the struggles that you are in the classroom right now, we went through the same thing and all the way through our careers. So we want to make sure that you don't back out when you have the talent, ability, and drive to stay in under some challenging environmental conditions. So that's me.
Mr. Love, when you said that, that reminded me of what some scholars said. We call our students scholars. What they said about, and staff were saying that they were just tired. These were what they call the BIPOC community members, right?
Mhm.
Everybody knows what BIPOC stands for. If not, I'm going to tell you, because scholars, this is what it means: Black, Indigenous, People of Color. Now, Dr. Willis has changed it to BLIPOC, Black, Latino, Indigenous, People of Color, because we're all in this together, right? But they said that they were having what they called racial battle fatigue, that they were tired. As Fannie Lou Hamer said, I'm sick and tired of
being sick and tired. Mhm.
And they were tired of being the one to go to for the Black History Month, or the scholars have to come up and form our own BSUs and try to find someone that will help them with their, to be an advisor to the group, etc. And so what I said is that means that we've got to come closer together. If we include everybody, and we're including everyone, because I was looking up Cathay Williams. She was born in Missouri, who was enslaved. This was years ago, and part of the Union. She wanted to be part of the Union Army. She was out of Jefferson City. This was way back in 1861. She was working as a support person for the Army that ignited an interest in serving in the military. Now, this is a female. She enlisted as a man so that she could be admitted to do her work, did a brilliant job, but years later, as she was in, she became ill, and that caused her gender to be revealed. They put her out, and she applied for a pension, and she was denied despite her service. But she had to go through those struggles, because she wanted to serve in our military. Bayard Rustin, he was one of the primary organizers behind the scene on March on Washington. You didn't hear much about him, but he was an openly gay man at the time when it was considered unacceptable. That's why we work so hard now, so that we can change these things. These people should not feel oppressed. We are no longer enslaved, because we were never slaves. So let's get that straight. We were never slaves. We were enslaved. Which is a big difference, right? And so we just have to remember that, and we have to lift each other up. We have to be like, what are those? The geese that fly, and when the lead one gets tired, he honks the horn, he or she honks the horn, they go to the back and they take over. They say, we got you, brother. We got you, sister. I know you're tired, but we got you. We're bringing up a new generation. And we must train them so that they understand that we have to do what we have to do, but violence is not always the way, because they'll say we're black angry men and women, or Latino angry men and women, but we can have an exchange of dialogue in which we understand each other. Now, if you start doing more and more blatant racism, then we're gonna call you out, and everybody's held accountable.
Mhm, mhm.
So no more, what is it? What did I say? Racial battle fatigue. No more.
Mhm. Yeah, we have to empower each other so that, as you said, we're flying in formation, but on too many of our campuses, you are the one. She is the one, he is the one. And so how do we build that network of geese? They may not be at your school, but we can all fly together. The other part, Dr. Willis, that you hinted at that I want to speak a little more directly to is how many folks, when you talk about Cathay Williams and Bayard Rustin and many others who had to hide or change parts of their identity to squeeze in. Even if I go back to Ellis Island, how many Polish, Jewish, and German immigrants changed their names to anglicize them so that they wouldn't be as noticeable among their white peers, even though their accents would give them away in about 10 seconds, okay? But there's been this propensity pretty much since America has been founded of people having to change themselves to fit in. And I would argue that our young people, that price has already been paid. You do not need to do that anymore. Use your voice to speak to equity. And as Dr. Willis said, speak strong. You don't have to run out of bounds, okay, unless you're pushed. But it's also incumbent upon other people to understand that your passion is not anger. Your passion is passion. Speak passionately to your causes. Sometimes them folks need to hear you, because if you speak very proper and normal and softly, they're not paying attention. It's kind of like your crazy mama again, okay? When she wants your attention, she raises her voice. And Dr. Willis can talk about that because she had her a mean old mama. Let me get out of here.
Mama. That's right. It's a difference when your mama calls you, hey, Dari, that was my nickname, versus when you hear the whole name, Darlene V. Griffin Willis, you know, or Darlene V. Griffin, you better get in here. You know.
Mm-hmm. Even at my age, somebody uses my full first name, I jump.
You know better, right?
Right, because the only folks called me Michael was my mother and my auntie and my grandmother. And I knew I was out of bounds. Let me get out of here.
Well, I think we're actually just jumping into the whole what now, and I think you guys have said a lot of phenomenal things. And I mean, I'd love to hear from Miss Alicia or anybody else would like to, contribute, because they've heard me talk all this whole month, but you guys are our guests and we'd love to hear from you.
I would love to say that for young people out there to get out of your inner circle and talk to people that are different than you. Because when you do that, you will just recognize how life-changing that experience will be. And that's really what Upstanders has been for me. It literally changed the course of my life. And for young people, when something doesn't sound right or feel right, do your own investigation and do your own research and find out what that real truth is, because we are bombarded with so many different opinions, and it's really easy to be swept away with what we already feel is right. And just challenge yourself and challenge your beliefs. And like I said, just get out there and meet different people.
I would have to probably echo what Alicia just said. Just growing up, I didn't learn a whole lot about my history. And I'm lucky that I married a guy that knows a whole lot about his history so he can teach me. So I'm taking that and looking to my resources, researching different books, having read stamped over, the summer, reading the things that my history teacher didn't, teach me in high school. If anyone has not read that book, I highly recommend it, just to kind of get some little snippets that are not included in today's
American history books, because you will be amazed as far as what information has been left out. But I know a lot of you are on social media. Some of you have your groups. Start having these conversations, start talking. And if you get stuck or anything, reach out to your teachers, reach out to your parents. We're here to support you in this journey. You're not alone.
I think I have two main, or maybe three main things that I would encourage as the now. The first is that young people's voices are important, especially when you advocate for your education. And if you ask, especially if you ask in public spaces, right, and you get your parents involved, a lot of times you're able to make huge shifts. And I was listening to Miss Angela Smith, and I actually just talked about this in my class yesterday, the idea of things that were not in the textbook that are now being added. And what we were discussing is Tulsa, which some people call the Tulsa Race Riot. I prefer the Tulsa Race Massacre, or the concept of Greenwood/Black Wall Street. So, it is a topic that I hear a lot of my contemporaries say, I can't believe we didn't learn about this. Well, I graduated high school in 1999. And even though this event happened in 1921, right, it was buried. Immediately after the National Guard was called in to stop the 18 hours of fires that destroyed 1,500 buildings, right? And killed anywhere between 70 and 300 people, depending on which documents you look at. They went in, they removed the article from the newspaper that started the events that led to the riot massacre, depending on which term you use. Afterwards, the bodies have not been found. It doesn't fit with the idea that racism was only in the South and that Jim Crow only existed in the South, so it is often not discussed. But after the Great Migration, when Black people left the South and moved north, there was Jim Crow North, and even if they had money to buy homes, they could not buy in what were called white communities. And they created their own towns, they created their own places, they created their own businesses. And Greenwood, Black Wall Street, this concentration of wealthy people creating their own space was completely obliterated in 18 hours. And then was covered up, and then was not given a commission to research it until 1997. So of course it wasn't in a history book that I was given access to. And they didn't finish the commission research until about 2015. It happened in 1921. It is 2021. The history is still being uncovered because it was not a priority. And so if young people who start getting these snippets, start asking, start pushing back, that will help speed that process up. Because you have access to things that even your parents did not have access to. It wasn't in the books because we didn't know yet, right? So that's my first thing. If you push, you can change the trajectory of the education that you are being given, especially from my understanding of the way the Classical Academy is constructed. The second thing that I would have to say is that usually when people tell you you need to learn history, they say you have to know history so that you don't repeat it. I think that's a very, very limited view. You have to think of what and how something was able to occur critically so that you can move forward with intentionality. And intentionality is what is going to constitute change. And again, I will echo that every single one of us has the opportunity to be agents of change. And in conversing, in raising our individual staminas for uncomfortable conversations, we can start to dive into our current situation where now people in America are just saying things like, well, we're just going to have to agree to disagree. That's a cop out. That means you don't want to listen to what I have to say. We need to stop agreeing to disagree. And we need to talk through the hard stuff. And we need to understand that this is a continued struggle and discrimination didn't go anywhere, ever. And that shouldn't make us uncomfortable because there is a fallacy that discrimination has to be intentional. And I think one of the beautiful things about Upstanders and talking to all these different people that I've never met is that intent is different than impact. So while you may not have intended that to hurt my feelings, it absolutely did, but you won't know unless I explain why.
That is so true.
And the last thing is, even though I would highly, highly argue that race is a social construct, right? Any sociology, even 101 student will say that to you. We can't pretend to not notice race in America. So when people say things like, I don't even see your color, that's dismissive, because if you don't see me as Black, then you aren't going to see when racism happens. And whether you choose to say it out loud or not, when I walk around my campus and someone wants to know which history teacher they're talking about, they say the Black one. So we need to open up the spaces to have conversations with respect and stop agreeing to disagree, because that's why we're here now. That doesn't work. We need to disagree to understand.
Oh, that's deep. And it is so right on. I love that when you talk about intent is different than impact. And, you know, even if you just believe that we're all humans, then that means if I hurt, you're hurting, and you should be sad that I'm hurting. And you should give me an opportunity to talk about that, to acknowledge, at least acknowledge it, accept it, and then maybe if you need to apologize, right? We talk about that. I kind of put it as the Willis A3 model, but it's anybody's model that, you know, but just putting it into place. And you're right. This talking about racial equity and inclusion is not going to be comfortable. And that's okay. And if you are the only BIPOC, Black, Latino, Indigenous person of color in your class, so there's very few of you, don't get discouraged by that, because you still can be a force to be reckoned with, right? You can still take a stance, you can still speak your truth. And yes, it might be uncomfortable, but it at least gets the dialogues going. I also want to just point out that there is a Black Wall Street board game that is available, that is amazing. So that's something to look into as well. And I love that when Ms. Copeland brought up about the Tulsa massacre, and there are a lot of Black towns that we had our own banks, we own things.
Hospitals, bus companies,
CEOs, presidents, oil, a lot of things, right? Mount Bayou, Mississippi is another town that you never hear about, where my mother-in-law was from. And it was run by Black folk. But now when you go back, it's like a desert. But everybody owned their own land and they did their own farming, etc. It was just amazing. We just have to find it and talk about it and educate people about it.
You know, we've had so many successes, but the battle is never over because it really hasn't been done right since the beginning, okay? I got 2 pages of notes, so I'm gonna get through these real quick, okay? Based on the legend of Ms. Copeland. Young people, do your research and bring it to your home community. Do your own research. Get it from different sources. Also, and I was guilty of this as a young man, My parents couldn't teach me what they didn't learn in school. We need to stop depending on someone else to tell our stories, so our voices are important. When you talk about cities being blown up and burned down, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, the police force and the army dropped bombs in the Black neighborhood, wiped out the Black neighborhood, not talked about. The story of Emmett Till, part of it is talked about, but if his mother, Mamie, had not had an open casket, we never would have heard of him either, because they were burying bodies in dams and nobody was, they were never found. The group of freedom riders, the names Cheney, Schwerner, Goodman, and Liuzzo need to be talked about. Viola Liuzzo was an Italian woman from up north who got murdered supporting Black folks' rights to vote down south. So we need to learn these folks. You need to do the research on that. And I'll say two things and then I'll pause for a minute. To back up Ms. Copeland, I believe there's no forgiveness without accountability and a heartfelt apology, okay? No, we're not gonna forget. We're not gonna just ignore it. Oh, it was in the past. No, because if you've ever had anybody in your family, not that I'm wishing ill on anyone, but if any of your elders were ever traumatized in any way, it affects you and them for their entire life and then on, because it's in your DNA. And just no forgetting that. And the last part, Jewel, you got close to it when you said there are people who claim not to see race. Whenever I hear that, and I'm just going to focus on Andrea for a moment, and I don't know Andrea, just met her today. If I looked at you and said, "Hi, Andre," you would probably correct me. I would not look at you and go, "I don't see gender." You're ignoring a key part of who that person is when you say you don't see race. If you don't see me, you don't see a Black man, you don't know me, you're ignoring me. You're whitewashing me. You want the good stuff and not the bad stuff. You want the benefits and not the pain. You want the good stuff and not hear about the struggle, okay? So when I hear that, I challenge young people and old people too. That stuff about not seeing race. Oh, so you just ignore a large part of who I am. I bet if me personally was walking behind you down a dark alley at 11:30 at night, you'd call the police saying there's a Black man behind me, but you don't see race. I need to quit.
No, but you're right on, Mike, because even on the news, if you look in the media, it's like a running joke in the BIPOC community, but you know that if the news is reporting there was a robbery tonight and they went into a red car and they're seen with red jeans, you go, okay, that's not a Black person. That's not a Latino person. If the reports just say Black male, 6 foot 5 inches or whatever, 5 foot, whatever. And
or Arab or Mexican or
Mexican, exactly. And now our Asian brothers and sisters are being beat up. Senseless. This is senseless. So it's going to take all of us to stand up and speak our truths and have courageous and intentional conversations, right? We're all going to have to reveal, and I'm saying, throwing it out there because that's my book. We're all going to have to reveal ourselves. The good, the bad, and the ugly. It is very important. And I want to just point out too, with the present, some our scholars today might go, oh, those are the old people, yeah, we know about them. But there are new people. There's the Kamala Harrises. Yes, she's old, maybe to a young person, but I was reading Noah Harris, 21 years old. He was the first Black man to be student body president at Harvard University. Now, he was a resident of Hattiesburg, Mississippi. So for even those of us that might feel isolated, he was able to navigate that educational system. He was the student body president at Harvard. Nicholas Johnson, 23, Princeton's first Black valedictorian in May of 2020. The school's 275-year history, 275 years, they had never had a Black valedictorian. Those are the things. Amanda Gorman, she's been working hard. We saw her. She got a platform now. She's only 22, the youngest inaugural poet laureate. So there are examples of young people that are making a difference. You don't hear about University of California, the entire system, Dr. Michael Drake, a Black man running, he's the first running the entire University of California system. These are the things that we've got to push out and strive for. Now, young people, if you don't want to get up early and get the worm, you might be in a different category. We make our own choices in life. And it is so important that we make the decisions that are going to not only benefit ourselves, but benefit the world as a whole.
And just to add one thought on top of that, and then I'll be quiet, Jewel, I'm sorry.
No, you're good.
Dr. Willis, we all know nobody did it by themselves. Nobody. And this is one of the issues.
Bootstraps. None of that. You hung on your own bootstraps. None of that.
Yeah. Because see, we tend to romanticize and fantasize about Dr. King, Muhammad Ali, Oprah Winfrey, like these folks just landed and hit the ground flying 90 miles an hour. The support network was built for them early on, and some of them didn't have one and had to create one. So we cannot think that, oh, just because the media lionized Serena Williams, okay, you weren't with her when her daddy was rifling tennis balls at her in public courts in Compton. You didn't see that. They don't talk about that. It's like she fell on the earth and was this amazing tennis player. So you put in the work. And Dr. Willis, you know, you said the early bird gets the worm. My daddy told me, he said, if you're going to make it, you got to burn the midnight oil. Okay. And so some of us were early birds and some of us were late risers, but burning the midnight oil. Find your place, gather your network. Okay. The analogy I'll give, if there are any young men who are watching this who play basketball, an open run, you get to pick 5 people to play. And the goal is to win and stay on the court, because if you lose, you're going to be sitting and watching for 4 hours. So you pick your team carefully. I don't need to know a thing about you, but if I see who's on your team, I know if you're a winner or not. I don't even have to know your name. You could be Joe Scrub, but if you're hanging around studs, you are going to have a serious team. People who want to learn the law, hang around lawyers. People who want to learn to be educators, hang around educators. People who want to learn to be doctors, hang around doctors. On the other end, those who want to thug and bug and sell drugs, they hang around guys who thug and bug and sell drugs. It's their own mentorship. It may not be positive, but they've chosen their team thoughtfully. Turn that around and build yourself an inclusive team that will lift everybody up, will support everybody, and will also remember that the best way to be a rebel is to be excellent, because the system ain't ready for you to be excellent.
When Mr. Love said that this is so far away, or that the old people, I started with Ruby Bridges. Ruby Bridges is 66 years old now. Claudette Colvin, she was the first to not give up her seat when she was 15. She's 81 now. It's not that far away. And because it's not that far away, it still manifests in each of us. And I know people in my family who will not go swimming because when they were young, they were only allowed to go to the pool once a month. And when all of our brothers and sisters of color were allowed to swim on that one day, while they were drying off, the pool would be emptied because they defiled the water and it had to be cleaned before everyone else could use it for the rest of the month. So they still don't go swimming. That pain manifests itself. It's here, and we need to talk about it. When I talk to my students about how they know what race they are, never once has a student told me that they knew what race they were because of a beautiful moment that happened. They know that they are a different race because of a negative event. Someone said a name to them for the first time and they didn't know what it meant. They were in a store and someone treated them a type of way and they said, "Why did that happen, Mom?" And their mom said, "Well, that's how they treat us." Never once have I heard it in a positive connotation. So when I think of the message, like, what can we do better? I know that I have to repackage that. So guess what I made sure to do with my kids? I told them about who they were before they went to school and someone else said it for them. We need to start repackaging these things. We need to acknowledge the pain and then allow it to come out in some other way. Do you know how many times I hear people around me say, we don't do that? And by that, they mean people of color. We don't go hiking. We don't go camping. We don't do that. Well, of course, there is that manifestation from pain, because at some point we went somewhere and we had a negative encounter. So in order to not have that negative encounter, we don't take our family into a space where something bad could happen. And then it becomes we don't do that. So the idea that this is somehow over, or that we are not still overcoming as America, because for every story that I just said, there is a counter to that, where someone inadvertently learned how to do that to someone else. We need to repackage all of that. And we can't if we pretend that it doesn't exist.
That's right. Because racism is learned. It is learned, it is taught. And that, and in California, where we live, it is very subtle. That's where the microaggressions come in. But if you're in Mississippi, in Jackson, Mississippi, where my husband grew up and had to get on the bus, get off the bus and hope the bus waited for him to get on, to go sit up in the crow's nest and watch the movies, to look at the colored only signs. We didn't necessarily have that here in California, or we didn't talk about it here in California. We had more subtle things. At least in Mississippi, you knew that Mr. Johnson, who had the Confederate flag, you knew he didn't like you or what you stood for. Here in California, it might be a little bit more subtle. Maybe I'm going to give the white person a different grade than I give the Black scholar. Because, my technology went out. Really? Everybody else got it in. Right? So just the little subtle things that take place. And I'll quickly tell this story that, again, I'm not pumping my book, but this is in there too about my husband. He's a Vietnam vet. He is dying today because he was exposed to Agent Orange. And just the other day, the US military acknowledged that his exposure was why he has end-stage pulmonary fibrosis and doesn't have long to live. But he was so happy that, and only because of American Legion and the United States congressmen in our district that fought for him. But in his story, he talks about, as a little boy, he worked as early as 7 years old, cutting lawns. He got up with the lawnmower, went and cut grasses, and he came to a house. And then that house, he said he was so tired. It was a big yard, and he was mowing and mowing, and he went and knocked on the door, and the owner said, you need to go around the back, boy. So he goes around to the back. What do you want? He says, I'm thirsty. It's hot. Can I just get a drink of water? She says, hold on a second. Get back down. Back down. You don't get so close to my door. Came back with a mayonnaise jar of hot tap water, not ice in it. Here, boy, drink this. He said he guzzled it down. She took it and threw it in the trash and said, don't ever do that again, boy. I helped you out this time. Now, I say all this to say, fast forward, he went to Vietnam. He fought for our country, did what he had to do. He went back home to visit family. He drives down that same street. He says, I see that house. That house was for sale, and he bought it for cash. Now, that's huge. Now, the woman may have rolled over in her grave 10 times, but he was saying to her, you didn't defeat me. I joined up with others, a network of support. And I fought for this country, even though when I came back from Vietnam, we were not accepted like all of the people are now. Talk about that. Look at that, how the Blacks and the Latinos were treated when they came back from Vietnam War. It was something that they spit on them. They couldn't even wear their uniforms, right? Look at that and those examples Take a look at the Divine Nines. I'm a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha. You see my pearls? Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority, along with Miss Smith. And it just, Miss Jewel, you want to? Or you support the Divine Nine?
I support the Divine Nine, and I was thinking of Miss Kamala too, babe.
That's right. That's right. Vice President Kamala Harris, a woman of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, and that are doing great things for the community. But what you don't hear, people talk about Divine Nine. Oh, they stepping, they doing this. What you don't hear is a lifetime commitment, community service, college applications, helping people go to college, making an impact on heart disease, lupus, you name it. And in order to be a member, at least to start the membership, you must be in college. Educated Black folk. And now it's predominantly Black, but it's open to others. There's so much we can do, young people. And I'm gonna say my family motto, and then I'm gonna be quiet unless I'm asked more questions, because I want to hear the other voices. But I say this because my husband's from Jackson, Mississippi, and we have 2 sons, and they are now 30 and 33. And our family motto was this: once a task has begun, never leave it till it's done. Be the labor great, whether it's racial equity, injustice, be the labor great or small. Young people, classical academy scholars, teachers, visitors, guests, administrators, we must do it well. That means that includes everyone or not at all. We got this. But we need each other. Reveal yourself.
I don't know what else to say. I think she said it all. I think you guys all have.
Sometimes, Charles, you just have to let that sit for a minute or two. Okay. Dr. Willis, I don't know if you remember, I think it may have been one of the last times I saw you in person was in Atlanta. And walked in, and I was doing a workshop in one room and you were doing a workshop in another room. And you are still to this day one of the people, and you know, I know, I'm not going to say I know your workshop as well as you do. I'm not going to insult you, but I've seen it enough times, but I will still sit in there because I get something different out of it every time I see you. And young people, whether it's an old book, I revisit old books and blow the dust off of them and go, man, I never noticed this before, okay? Sometimes it's a movie I'm watching and I notice that I missed something subtle, but definitely wanting to lift folks up. The job is never going to be done. So as Dr. Willis said, you don't get to quit because Rosa didn't quit. Dr. King didn't quit. Muhammad Ali didn't quit, okay? Their time may have run out, but they never quit. Jewel, Ms. Copeland, you spoke about trauma. My paternal side of the family is from Gulfport, Mississippi. The family cottage is 4 blocks from the beach, 4 blocks. The railroad track runs between the cottage and the beach. And we all know what the railroad track is indicative of in the South. The Black part of town versus the white part of town. My father passed away in 2003. I went back to have the service. Afterwards, we had a dinner at a restaurant on the beach. Beautiful moonlit night. I'm walking with one of my aunts who at the time was 56 years old. And someone in the group said, you must have fond memories of being on this beach. My auntie got real quiet and she said, this is the first damn time I've been on this beach in my life. 56 years old, returning to the scene of trauma because Jewel, you were hinting at it, the ancestors, their primary goal was safety, protecting the young ones, because they knew what would happen if they stepped out of line. It was dangerous. It was life-ending. Lots of folks disappeared. When you talk about, Dr. Willis talked about her husband coming back and his work and his heroism not being recognized. Muhammad Ali won a gold medal at the Olympics and came back and couldn't buy a sandwich in downtown Louisville, where he was from. Jesse Owens swept the gold medals in 1936 Olympics in Germany, came back and couldn't get a job. He had to race racehorses at state fairs to support himself.
Even though he had a college degree from Ohio State.
Yeah. Yep, wasn't recognized, okay, for obvious reasons, okay. We cannot forget that until there's some accountability and a heartfelt apology. And then how do we make it right? This is what you do with family members and loved ones if you have wronged them. Yes, I'm sorry, I didn't know intent versus impact. How can I make it right? Number one, don't ever do it again. Number two, tell everybody you know that that's out of bounds around me and people like me, because it doesn't end with you. If you don't correct and check somebody else, they're going to fall short. And if I'm with you when it happens, I'm looking at you like, come on, we talked about this. You know, Ms. Copeland talks about having accomplices of all backgrounds, and that's what we need. You know, we need Black folks to speak up for gay and lesbian folks, and gay and lesbian folks to speak up for Latinx folks, and Latinx folks to speak up for disabled folks. However this works out, we need everybody's voice top level so that the nonsense is cut down a little bit. And young people, it's your turn. You know, we did our best. It's like a relay race, okay? You bust out the quarter mile and then you hand it to somebody. You don't get to watch them take 3 steps and go, give me that back, I could do better. You let them run. And if the coach or you hasn't said, you know what, man, if you would just get the stride going, man, you'd be a little bit quicker. You teach them to do better. It's not incumbent upon anyone to do all the work. We have to do the work collaboratively.
And it's not easy work.
No, no.
America as a society, we get upset at the person who calls attention to an issue instead of the actual issue. So if you do become an accomplice, if you do start speaking up, if you do your part and you publicly acknowledge, reflect, and take action, please understand that you are going to be someone who then gets some of that negative energy thrown back at you. But we don't do the right thing because people are going to come with you. You do the right thing because it's the right thing to do. And, you know, I know we talked about Dr. King, but Dr. King also said a lot of things that don't get quoted. He said we have to fight against an obnoxious peace. And an obnoxious peace is the peace where we don't say anything so that nothing happens. And Dr. King also tried to commit suicide. And had he succeeded, would not have been the person that is now remembered. And even though he finished his life until his assassination, he was not loved by all. He was on the FBI watch list. He was arrested 19 times. And there were many people, Black included, who did not like what he was doing because it was causing trouble. So when you speak out and you start being an upstander instead of a bystander, it is a long road.
But you're not by yourself.
Not alone.
Even if you look at the tragic picture of Dr. King assassinated on the balcony of the Lorraine Hotel, 6, 7, 8 men standing over him, pointing in different directions, tending to him, looking, making phone calls, and recalling that Dr. King was assassinated at the peak of the intersection of 2 things he was speaking against, the Vietnam War and economic inequality. And folks are starting to realize that poor white folks really didn't have it any better than poor Black folks. They were all being taken advantage of and marginalized, and didn't even get a chance to talk about women in the workplace. It didn't get to that point when he was taken out. Here we are 50 odd years later, having the discussion about the unequal pay between men and women. The fact that poor white folks in Appalachia don't have it any better than poor Black folks in the ghetto. And in some cases, it's worse. So we have to, again, include all of these folks and have that critical eye, I think, as Ms. Copeland said, and make sure that we're looking at it not from a limited perspective, but from a larger overview of some of the inequalities built into this system. You know, America's built on two things, land and labor. The more that you can get for free, the wealthier you become.
And you know what, Mr. Love, the people that were surrounded around Dr. King when he was killed, they didn't give up. They took the baton and ran with it in different ways to make
Yes, they did.
continue.
Very good analogy. I missed that point. Thank you.
But that's all right. But I'm reminded by, I'm sure we all have heard this, by James Baldwin's quote that says, nothing or not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced.
As you guys are speaking, Mrs. Copeland, Mr. Love, and Dr. Willis, as well as you, Alicia, I'm thinking about our students because not only am I a teacher, I'm also the mother for the youngest, a 13-year-old female. And I know just eavesdropping, they are having these conversations among themselves. And going back to what Ms. Copeland said about impact and intent, and Mr. Love and Dr. Willis, you bringing up the topic of trauma. And going back to the microaggressions and blatant racist acts, just reviewing what I've been able to read in your book and kind of want to bring it up to speed to where we are now. From what I understand and what I was able to read, a lot of those microaggressions and blatant acts happened to a lot of our young people. And they did have a good support system as far as being able to kind of talk it out and be able to, you know, kind of come to terms with it, maybe not forget. And some of that still impacts them today, whether it's anxiety, whether it's depression. So now you come to the events that happened last year. A lot of our students were still probably in distance learning, about to start distance learning, so they're still being socially isolated from their peers. So we're already dealing with, you know, the concept of anxiety, concept of depression increasing. And I'm looking at that in terms of, again, trying to tie in some of the microaggressions and some of the conversations I've heard with my daughter and her classmates. One, you already have that layer of anxiety, depression because the social isolation. And then now you're bringing this other layer for several of our students that are of, you know, students of color, which can add more anxiety and depression, right? How do we help them resolve, not resolve, but maybe address in their isolation? And I think it's really about having these honest conversations. Again, Ms. Copeland, you said there's, or maybe Dr. Willis, you stated that we can't agree to disagree anymore because of the level of anxiety and depression that we may be feeling or students may be feeling because either of the distance learning or some of the racial biases or, you know, the microaggressions that are occurring. These conversations need to be heard and had. So, and had, even if it causes anxiety on the other side, if you understand what I'm saying. There has to be some level of what's the word that I want to use, of uncomfortability, if that's even a word, on both sides to be able to bring these issues to the forefront and be able to talk about them and hopefully, you know, come to some understanding.
I think that conversations can only happen in safety. And I don't know, I know some, but I don't know many students that are able to create that safe space themselves. And in that case, that is when you need your teachers, that is when you need your mentors, that is when you need everyone else. And anything that is stated publicly, that is offensive publicly, needs to be addressed publicly. So when we are creating safe spaces, as the adult, the onus is on us to address and make sure that everyone is able to speak. And in doing that, we also have to create the environment where just because everyone can speak, we should also make sure that everyone listens. And then we need to also address that discomfort shouldn't come from overt hate. So if someone says something, it's my responsibility to say, well, now that is an opinion and your opinion is valid, and I would never tell you not to have a feeling, but the way that you said that cannot be done again. Now let's keep moving forward. It is my responsibility to do that so that everyone feels safe. Everyone feels safe to share, and everyone feels safe to have an opinion. So I think that anxiety and depression is real. The best way I've ever heard it described to me is the idea that you're swimming, you know how to swim, and you still feel like you're drowning. And you're moving your arms, you're moving your limbs, you're kicking, and you can't stay above the surface. And in a lot of ways, and we are isolated and dealing with all of these emotions, that's what it feels like. It feels like we're swimming and we're moving out of control and we just can't get enough out of the surface, and everything feels really, really hard. And unfortunately, the only way to relieve that is to let some of it out and talk. But we all have to be safe enough to speak.
And I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. And people think that freedom of speech means I can say whatever I want. But free speech was originally intended to protect unpopular speech, right? So it's the freedom to say things that not everyone wants to hear, and that's absolutely true. But we're not free from the consequence. And if I can teach anybody anything, it's that you don't have to make yourself smaller for rooms that you've outgrown. You don't have to make yourself smaller to make other people feel comfortable. And that also means my pain. So if I react in pain to something that you said, I should be safe to allow to do that and then correct it if I go too far. We need to build stamina by building everyone's stamina, including the adult's responsibility to control, to a degree, the environment that allows this to take place. Because children need to be allowed to be children. And correction is love. And safety is love. And if I am not providing that, then how can I expect you to learn anything? And students who are feeling alone should never be damaged more by their peers or the adults. And ignoring is damaging as well.
And I totally agree. And I think that's why I brought it up, as far as our students are having these conversations on their own. And I don't know if they're having them in safe spaces. So it's really up to us to kind of carry these conversations forward. And I believe this is the beginning.
Yeah, and it's real. Mental health challenges, especially in this environment of distance learning, it is so real. I can't tell you how many phone calls that we've received from parents when it's almost too late. because sometimes when you're so close to it, you don't realize it. But you have someone that's loving and nurturing and caring, and immediately, almost in all the cases, that's what I do love about technology, because the Zoom, if I can't see you in person, the Zoom, I can see you. And in almost all the cases, it was, first of all, get him, get her to ER right now. The parents were too close to see it. But you all, as administrators, as counselors, as teachers, instructional aides, you are on the front line. You see our babies, and they may now know how to cope or think they do, but they're spiraling out of control. They're taking temporary challenges and making them permanent solutions. And there is never enough I'm sorry's that we can say to a family when their child or their scholar is gone, when it could be prevented. And sometimes it's just a smile. Hey, Anthony, I know, what's wrong? Come and talk to me. And we've got to get our scholars into saying, Miss Smith, Teresa is spiraling. I don't want to tell you, but they've got to tell us too, which means that we have to have what? A relationship with all of our scholars. Because everything is, nothing is as it appears. We don't know what happens when those doors close. But we have to take everything serious when it comes to our youngsters. And I want to say to our scholars, I'm gonna look straight into this camera. I believe in you. You don't know me, I don't know you, but I love you. And I know that you can do this, because the you really is we. And we have you. We just need you to let us know or tell us, even if you just want to wave a flag, whatever you want to do. We want to make sure that you continue to contribute to this world. And there's nothing that you could ever say or do that would make me, and especially your parents, to stop loving you. And that's what we have to get for everybody. Don't blow it off like that's just teenagehood. If they're in their room and that door is shut, you can't get them to come out, they're not eating, those are clear signs. That's a textbook case of depression and anxiety. And not to mention, I learned this word just the other day, maybe some of you know it already. You say it's an educational achievement gap, especially with the BIPOC community. And the response was, I'm going to push you further. And Dr. Powell said, it's a system response gap. Let that sink in. Because as a system, we're failing. But we can correct it right now by having this right now, this program. I'm telling you now, I'm Dr. Darlene V. Willis. My phone number is 619-823-7103. And you can text me and say, I don't know you, but I saw you on Classical Academy Black History Month program. And you said if I needed some help, I could call you. And you can.
That's amazing.
Yeah, thank you.
Just to let the young folks know, I have 2 points. We have some unhealthy educators dealing with these issues as well. The educators' world has been shook upside down. I wasn't trained to teach through a laptop. I was trained to teach in person and connect with young people and put the lesson aside. However, in discussions, and it's interesting, Dr. Willis, hearing you say that, I've gotten calls from educators, Mike, I don't know what to do. They won't turn their camera on. I said, were they engaged before when you were in class? They were probably on the back wall, half asleep, weren't doing anything anyway, but at least I could look at them. Well, then you didn't build the bridge personally for them to step across it. This is a systemic thing. The pandemic has brought a lot of inequity to light. And I think we're trying to backwards plan in some ways to deal with that. But the inequities and systematic problems and failures were already there. Black students didn't start failing in March of last year. They were not afraid of having the conversations that Ms. Smith was saying she sees her students having. They were having it pre-pandemic. It's just as exacerbated now, okay? My comment on top of Dr. Willis's is that every student and every educator watching this, you're here for a reason. And it is your goal, your life quest to find what that reason is and apply it to help other people in their lives. Because it's not a me thing, it's a we thing. You have a talent and a background that nobody else has. And you can bring something to the forefront that would stop Dr. Willis and Ms. Copeland and everybody in here in their tracks. Whoa. Never thought of it that way. It is your obligation to find that gift and bring it forth and share it. And the other part is, if your needs are not being met for whatever reason, find a person to speak out to. Email, phone call. I've mentored young men for a while. I've never done this before, but I'm going to put myself out there. 619-992-3242. Now, I'm going to tell you, the first time you call or text, I'm not going to respond because I don't do ghost numbers, okay? But if you leave me a heartfelt message on there, I will get back to you. And if I can't get you to Charles or Andrea or Jessica or Jewel, wherever you might be in that world, we're going to find somebody. And in some cases, I found myself, we just need somebody to talk to. You know, I don't want you to, this is what my daughter says, I don't want you to fix anything, Daddy. I just want you to listen. Part of me is like, get in there and fix it. No, that's your battle. I have to back away. I'm going to give you some of my thoughts, some of my tips, move forward and see what happens. Now, you know, in the interest of transparency, if you tell me that someone's threatening you, you're threatening harm to yourself, etc., we're going right to code red, okay? But if we deal with it in the bud, as Dr. Willis said, and Ms. Copeland said, and Ms. Smith said, when it comes up in the beginning, and this is something, see, this is what bothers me about some of us. If we ran our personal relationships the way we ran our school relationships, we would have no personal relationships. We ignore people, we put people off, we marginalize them. Then when they raise their voice, and gentlemen, I'm talking to you, when the ladies in your life raise their voice and you go, why you got to raise your voice and get mad? Knucklehead, you haven't been listening the last 5 years. Okay? You know, back in the generation, you know, Ms. Copeland, Ms. Smith, I'm sure you got a rolling pin and a frying pan somewhere to get somebody's attention. Okay? Hopefully you don't have to use it. And Jules said, like, it's right here. But we cannot let our kids get to that point where they're ready to explode and blow up. And then we go to the office. You need help. Yeah, they've been trying to tell you that. I say this to the educators in the room again, the tension is real. Folks are worried about grades, worried about test scores. You know what? 50% of your freshmen were failing pre-pandemic anyway. So instead of worrying about the grades, if you reach out to the individuals, like your personal relationships, if you take time and listen to them, take time and talk to them, you might find the grades go up. I actually taught in a program the last year I taught. We had students in there with 3rd and 4th grade reading and math levels. In 1 year, some of them were improving between 1.5 and 1.9 in 1 year. And they said, well, what were you doing in the support class, love? Nothing but motivational stuff. Teaching them to be students, teaching them to be citizens, teaching them to be, as Dr. Willis said, scholars. What does it mean to be a scholar? And how are you going to overcome some of the challenges in your life? Because they're there, they're real. And you need to figure it out. I can help you, but you have to do the work. So there's a lot going on. I know I'm on overtime. Charles is giving me the thing like, okay, I need to bring this to some closure here. But again, young people and old people who may be watching this, a little discomfort leads to change. I'm going to piggyback on what Jules said earlier. The discomfort is there for a reason. If you're sitting in a box and you haven't moved, something's wrong. The last thing I'll say on that is everybody, every teacher, every counselor, every administrator wants to be in a groove. You want to get in the groove, get in the groove, get in the groove. You sit in the groove too long, it becomes routine, and then it's a rut. And then you wake up one day and you go, why am I in this rut? Because you're too damn comfortable. You built it yourself. You need to refresh something every year. Those lesson plans from 2 years ago, shred them, start from scratch. Have you read a book in your area in a while? When's the last education theory book you read? Well, back when I was in, sorry, that was the 80s. Things have changed. Some of you need Dr. Willis's book. But this is what we all have to do. We expect young people to be lifelong learners, but my lesson plans are from 1983. So some of us need to experience some discomfort, and the discomfort is a good thing. As my grandmother said, at the end of it, we're all going to hug and have a meal anyway. Okay, so that's my thought. How much time we got, Charles? Because this is going to be one long video.
A lot of editing.
Yeah, there was so many, gosh, I'm going to be sitting on this a lot. I have pages on pages of notes. And I can't thank you all enough for sharing your hearts, sharing your wisdom, being vulnerable, and creating a space that is safe for everybody, letting everyone know that there's space at the table for them, no matter what race, gender, or how you identify yourself, that this is a conversation that we all need to be having, continuous. It's not just a one time, okay, we did it and we defeated racism, it's over, we can move on. But that it's a place that when we sit in that discomfort, that growth happens, that change happens, and that is the achievement. The achievement is that we're continuing the conversation, not that we've arrived, because I don't know if we ever do arrive.
No, it's never over. It's never over. And one thing I do want to say before I mute myself for the last time, I want to thank Ms. Smith for digging deep and bringing us together and being vulnerable and bringing her concerns forward, because without you, we're not here today. And the fact that you brought this up, it's going to change your children's life path and everyone they talk to, because of the conversation that you've had with them and any pearls that you share with them from this group. So I want to thank you, bottom of my heart.
Absolutely.
I want to thank all of you for just being here and having this conversation. I'm so glad it was able to come together. Like Charles said, a whole bunch of good nuggets. I wish I was taking notes, but I'll get them from Charles.
Yeah.
But yes, thank you, Alicia. Thank you, Ms. Copeland. Thank you, Mr. Love. And thank you, Dr. Willis. I really appreciate all of you.
Well, as always, we just thank all the families that participate in these videos with us. This is not the end of the conversation, it's just the beginning. And so thank you, and hope everyone has a great weekend.